Okay, so previously we got to the end of the A section here in the second movement. This double bar line is really the indication that we're going to do something else, and if we needed even more indication, we've got quite a contrast in the key signature here. So just from context, we've had B flat major over here. The most sensible idea that you might have without looking at any of the notes even is that we might go to B flat minor, relative minor, for the middle section. So this middle section, of course, has a contrasting key. It also doesn't take the subject or the thematic material from section A. It's going to do its own thing, and it does take whatever hints of chromaticism we might have had previously and take that to more of an extreme here. So we don't have any cadences. It's worth noticing that we don't have an immediate cadence into a new key. So it's a little bit ambiguous at this point. And all of this chromaticness is going to undermine that sense, any sense of tonality that we might have had. So we've got a lot of semitone movements in here. Each time that it starts, really, if you think of this as a unit, each time that it starts, we're going to have the whole thing moving up by a semitone. That's going to continue, of course, until we get this change here, but the next segment does a similar sort of thing. We've got lots of this bobbing up and down semitone movement here. So kind of a gloomy sense. Some people would suggest this is going to be kind of an underworld sort of theme. Some areas you might be able to link up with something in the first movement that does this. I'll leave that for you to think about. But we're stuck in this very ambiguous, kind of gloomy, is it a minor tonality? Is it just very, very chromatic at this point? We've also got some fifth relationships though. So here we had the B flat, which of course would be the first, the tonic in B flat minor. And over here we've got a similar pattern in the piano part, starting on the fifth. So we've got some elements that might suggest to us that we're not crazy to think that it could be something in B flat minor. So some areas we have a little bit of a digression, a little bit of preparation perhaps to re-enter into that theme. So we've got the re-entry here, similar to how we had it up here, but of course the violin's going to take it instead of the cello at this point. So we have these sort of slowing down, spacing out segments before we get back into that again. So there are lots of chromatic things going on here, so it's not really, for a lot of the time, doesn't make a lot of sense to do a lot of chord analysis on this, especially when we've just got one instrument playing. In some places it becomes more possible to do that, but you might get some weird chords in here. So things like, for example, do we have potential Neapolitan chords, for example? Something that is based on very out of the key notes. So one example that we could pick out is here. So just be careful about reading off notes and looking for accidentals here with the key signature too. So we do have a G flat at the bottom. We have the E flat, which is actually lower than that. It's the lower E flat on the bass clef. We have C flat as well. Now C flat's not something that's in the key signature, but it could be that flat second, the flat supertonic to form a Neapolitan chord. And that would make sense with the E flat being the low note as well, because that chord is often in second inversion. So I'm doing a flat 2B or flat 2 in second inversion here, or an N6. There might be other occasions of chords like that you can spot, but we're not really going to have cadences in here, so I wouldn't do a whole analysis there, just to look at the structure. We get definitely more, it's more possible to look at chords as we get to this section where we've got fuller harmony available between the different voices. But we're really getting to some sort of key searching. It's still very, very chromatic, almost scrolling through the keys before we get to this very clear, heroic D flat section. So this is where we get suddenly all those accidentals disappear, and we get a very clear D flat F, D flat F, and some A flats up here to kind of finish off that triad. So this section really is something where we're breaking off from that sort of gloomy sense and getting into this dramatic, fortissimo, heroic kind of theme instead. So you could suggest that the A section has the first theme and this B section has a second theme, which is the floating around in B flat minor, or sort of in B flat minor, and a third theme which comes in here in bar 160. These chords might look a little bit strange, but think of it as a seventh. So you've got the A, C, E, or rather A flat, C, E flat, and the G on there. These are really form diminished sevenths, but they're not the seventh, not on the seventh note of D flat, but they do then resolve back into D flat here as well. So this D flat major theme is obviously presented mostly in the piano with a bit of punctuation from the strings as we go through. And the strings get a little bit more insistent with their dotted rhythm element here. But we very quickly get back into that second theme, the B flat or the chromatic elements. So it doesn't go full on, we're kind of getting fragments of that. And it doesn't last for very long either. We get into a little bit of a pattern where we're still having these semiquaver drops and rises. But this is really a transition or modulation getting us to this, which when you first look at this, if you were sight reading, is probably quite horrific, but it's a quick shift from the 5 flats here to a 4 sharp key signature. So really all that is a semitone shift again from D flat to E major. So if you're a string player, it's kind of just shifting everything up a little bit, so you can play the same themes. Unfortunately, the main theme is again in the piano. So this is the same thing that we would have had in the D flat a few bars earlier, but modulated in E major here instead. So it's a little bit of a strange modulation compared to what we might have had before in the other movements. In the first part of this movement, we've got a lot of either fifth based or third based modulations, not usually a semitone, but this is a good way to kind of build some intensity in this section as well. So this is kind of a repeat. We have mainly the piano taking this. Obviously the key is different, but it's taking the same material. The strings are interjecting in the same way, and we land in this same way again with these broken triplets back into the semitone movement as well. So this is really a development of that original motif. So you could think of this B section as being quite extended, having a development section-ish within there, and it's just taking that original semitone movement, the chromatic movement, and adding a bit more to it, isn't it? It's adding a bit more dialogue between the different instruments or between the different hands in the piano, and it's adding in a lot more of these longer notes as well to give us a little bit more development on top of what we would have had before. At the end here on 229, we've got something new. This is added those quaver movements in the strings. So the main part of the theme is still kind of going in the piano, but the strings are settling on this repeated note, which is B flat for both of them in octaves, but it eventually ends up in F. So it's not a dominant pedal. You could by all means describe this as a pedal, but I wouldn't say it's a dominant. Say it's a pedal B flat, which is going to be the subdominant in F. So where does that really happen? Where do we get to the F? That's going to be further down. The rolls are kind of reversed from 238, 239, and the piano has got this octave pattern. It's more than one octave, really, actually. We've got all the way down the bottom octaves, missing out that higher bass clef F, and then the upper octave in there as well. So this is now supporting the strings taking the semiquaver movements. So that motif is still developed. We've kind of got these longer phrases here where we're alternating between notes, usually ending up higher than we started in each section. And that's really going to lead us to another modulation. So it's kind of giving us a sense of an unsettled sense that's going to lead us back here, but the modulation really starts earlier. So here's the area where that's taking us in towards this B flat major. So if we think we've been in B flat or in F here, we've been taken back to that original tonic by the time we get to the end of this section. So we're kind of getting a repetition of some of that material from the D flat and then E major theme, but back into B flat for this section. But it's very similar. It's very similar to what we've had before. Again, with those string interjections, the piano's taking most of the work here, keeping that going, extending a little bit on the section where the strings are interjecting there. And we have then a transition back down so that we can return to that the A section of the ABA form. So transition really starts around here. We've got this descending pattern, which if you contrast with the end of the A section that had a lot more ascending stuff going on, we're bringing this piano part down and out of the way, ready for a section A to reappear from here. This downwards stuff in the piano does act sort of as a perfect cadence. We've got the B flat here landing, so it's B flat all across really, and the D's come in later. But this feels like a cadence to end that B section. So the rest of the movement is essentially a repetition of what we had already in the section A. So I won't go through specifics of section A because that's already in the previous video, But I will jump to the end of the movement where something a little bit different happens, because of course we're not just going into back into section B and repeating, but we are looking towards ending this movement. So we've got links into this final section of the subject, a few fragments where we're heading upwards again, and the piano is really taking that further this time. That's going to lead us into the coda, which does have elements of this second subject, the chromaticism that we saw in the beginning of the B section here. So we've got a restatement of that B section subject or motif in octaves this time, rather than a solo cello taking that forward, and lots more layers on top of that going forward as well. So this really takes us towards the end, but we can't have the end without another statement of the A theme. So the original theme from the A section comes up here, just for a really short presentation, to kind of remind us, I guess, where we came from. And then this huge B flat scale is going to take us then to the end. So it feels quite like a dramatic finish with this fortissimo here as well. We're starting off very quiet and very soft, and then very emphatic last 4 notes. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the second movement, which means, of course, the next video will go into the third movement.